Hi everybody. This week we're going to be discussing art-based research, also called art-based practices or art-based research methods. The texts we're going to be using this week, we have 3 chapters out of 3 books. One Sage Review, which uses photo elicitation, and the article for review is actually going to be an article that is from my dissertation, where I use expressive arts in the research process. The books that we're going to be using are Barone Eisner's book called Art-Based Research. We'll be using chapter 1 in that, which is the introductory chapter. Hervey's book, Artistic Inquiry in Dance Movement Therapy, Creative Research Alternatives. And we'll be using chapters 3 and 4 in that text. And then Leavy's book, Method Meets Art, Art-Based Research Practice. And we'll be using the first chapter in that. And those texts actually look like this or thereabouts. Make sure to look at what edition. I know that Patricia Leavy's text is at least in its 2nd edition on Method Meets Art and Art-Based Research Practice, and I believe that that is a red cover. And Art-Based Research, Barone and Eisner may be in their next edition as well. 2 other important texts to mention are Sean McNiff's Art-Based Research and Gary Knowles's and Andrea Cole's Handbook of the Arts in Qualitative Research. McNiff's book is a great read. It's like a lot of McNiff's work, is very much focused on the expressive arts practice and the practices that he's developed over the years and integrating that into the research process. The handbook text is thick and very expensive, and if you can get your hands on it, even to look at it, I would highly recommend it if you're interested in using art-based research. It's a very valuable text, and I'm not sure which edition it's in, but it is actually quite a very solid and academically oriented text, and I would recommend getting that. I just don't use it here because it is so expensive. So one of the basic principles within art-based research is that art-based research incorporates art making into the research process, and that seems somewhat intuitive there, based on the title and the name of the research process. But the way that they really view integrating art, or why they do it, is the belief that by using expressive arts or the art making process, you're actually accessing additional data or information. The data that you might be accessing could be you could think of it as a triangulation of a phenomena. So not only are you looking at it from one standpoint, like interviewing individuals, but you could be having individuals use expressive arts or make some sort of art piece or movement or sculpture as a way of expressing that particular phenomena that they're discussing. It can also be looked at as information, not just from the participants, but also from the researcher. The researcher within qualitative research, the researcher really is key as far as processing the data, the information, the transcripts, the qualitative data, and coming to some new meaning, usually through finding themes or categories by coding the data and coming to some new hermeneutical understanding of it. And it doesn't even have to be hermeneutical. It can be using phenomenologically. It can be just description of the experience. But the point is that as the researcher is engaged in this process, she or he may want to engage in their own art making to help them understand the transcripts or the data that they're working with, and in that way really diving into the tacit awareness of the researcher and drawing that knowledge and that awareness out within their own art making process. So art-based research can also be thought of as a way of incorporating art making as a means of transformation within the participants and possibly the researcher and the audience. And in this way, art-based research practices can be a bridge into the transformational research practices, and there's a whole area of transformational research which you can study. Transformational research aligns with action research, cooperative inquiry, Heron and Reason's work. It aligns with transpersonal psychology, humanistic psychology, these types of areas which really focus on working with the participants in a way that's not just objectifying them to get information out of them, but really engaging them in the research process, and engaging them even in multiple steps along the way, and seeing if there's some sort of transformation that might happen within the individual as you're doing the research. But anyway, just wanted to mention that this can be a bridge into that other area. This being art-based research can be a bridge into transformational research practices. So let's start with Barone and Eisner's work. They really frame art-based research as an aspect of qualitative research, and by and large, I think this is absolutely true. The qualitative research views data in a fundamentally different way than quantitative, positivist, empirical ways view data. Data in qualitative research can be more meaning-based, hermeneutical, can be heuristic, can involve the researcher, can be just very descriptive, and can involve, potentially just a few participants or even one participant. And within art-based research, the same is true. It can be very descriptive of experiences. It can result in emotionally evocative expressions which inform the reader in an empathic way. The focus is really to enlarge human understanding through the incorporation of the art-making process and the product that may come out of the art-making process. Again, in description, in finding that deeper meaning about a particular experience. One of the other things that Barone and Eisner discuss is that the focus in art-based research is not validity. In fact, the term validity would be not recommended for this type of research, but instead credibility. Is this credible research, and are you finding resonance? Are you finding that the emotionally evocative expression is doing exactly what it intends to do, create some empathic resonance within the researcher and within the readers of the research, or the witnesses? It doesn't even have to be written text coming out of the art-based research. It can be some other type of expression that is the result of art-based research. And finally, one of the other things in this first chapter that Barone and Eisner really discuss and focus on is that art-based research is a part of kind of this whole idea of methodological pluralism, looking at things from multiple perspectives. You don't have to be using one focused epistemological way, one way of looking at the world, one ontology, but looking at something from multiple views, and thus gaining a broader understanding and even a more in-depth understanding of a particular experience that you're focusing on. One thing that I would like to say here, though, about the qualitative research, I have had students of mine who, when engaged in their dissertation work, actually use quantitative research with art-based research methods. Sarah Garcia, she was working with highly sensitive adolescents, and she was working with them as a clinician using expressive arts and the expressive art practice with them to help them understand their sensitivity and their highly sensitive nature. And her participants were adolescents within alternative high schools who were in the alternative high schools because of different problems that they had when in school, and had been diagnosed or self-diagnosed as highly sensitive individuals. And so part of her research was doing a pre-test to see whether or not they actually scored on the high sensitivity scales, and looked at how their understanding and their self-esteem changed over a certain number of weeks after engaging in expressive arts. And so it was really a pre-test, post-test type of study, but still using the art-based art-based practices, and she came up with some very interesting results demonstrating that it actually helped, the art-based practices helped the sensitive adolescents. Patricia Leavy's text, delving into that now. First of all, I want you to note the table of contents. I included that specifically with this PDF. There are many different types of art-based practices. We just last week covered narrative inquiry, and narrative inquiry actually can fall within the broader umbrella of art-based research. There's also poetry, incorporation of poetry into the research process. One of our faculty at ITP, or used to be at ITP, or Sophia, John Fox, really was very skilled at using poetry here, and he was a clinician as well. Music therapy, incorporating music into the research process, dance or movement, the visual arts, performance arts. Visual arts might include painting, oil and chalk pastels, and drawing. You also have photography, and the article that we're reading for this week, that's the article for analysis, actually not the article for analysis, but rather the SAGE article, just to demonstrate the use of art-based research. That article uses photo elicitation, or the taking of pictures, to help the researcher understand where the child is coming from and from a cultural perspective with regard to that particular study. So it's very interesting. Note the use of photography there. Leavy talks about art-based research as being holistic and integrated in its perspective. No wonder that it is aligned with transpersonal psychology and humanistic psychology in that respect. Art can be, or the art-making process can be incorporated into data collection, the analysis of the data, interpretation, think of hermeneutics here, and the representation of the findings, according to Leavy. I add that art making can also be incorporated into topic selection and refinement. For example, if I am considering and trying to understand this question that I'm sitting with and thinking that it might lead me to a potential research topic, one thing I might do is engage in an art-making process to find out more about what is drawing me to this topic and what I really understand about it. And I might go through a series of expressive art sessions, diving deeper into my own emotions and understanding around a topic, and then sit with that and see how that helps clarify the question that I really have and that I really want to address within my research. And then from there, you can go into constructing the appropriate research question and finding what method will help you address that question, and then going into your data collection, analysis, and interpretation. Leavy also talks about the art-based research, or the history of art-based research, and its development as an extension of the qualitative research movement. Again, Leavy is going to agree with Eisner here that art-based research methods really are a part of the qualitative research movement and really fall within the larger qualitative research umbrella, which is absolutely appropriate. On page 12, Leavy discusses the strengths of art-based research, for example, the facilitation of description of experiences, or the communication of emotional aspects of an experience, or the communication of something that is ineffable. You're interviewing somebody and they get to a point where they can't really describe what it is that they experienced. Well, you might go into another modality of expression, such as movement or song or using clay or painting, to help the person describe what it is that they can't really describe in words. But for every research method has certain strengths, but it also has certain weaknesses. Art-based research can't be used with every question. You have to really hone in on what's the appropriate question, the appropriate topics to use with art-based research, just like any research method. On page 15, Leavy goes into the different struggles, and she discusses validity and reliability, which she considers inappropriate measures for good art-based research, because the terms validity and reliability really come out of the positivist empirical model, where you're using hypotheses and specific operationally defined constructs, and so and as well as test-retest reliability. For example, you're using certain measures and determining whether those measures are reliable measures for a particular construct. And she really is saying that that's not appropriate here. Rather, what you really want to do is see if the art-based research is being evocative, if it's evoking the experience that you're really trying to, and the emotions around that experience and the understanding around that experience. Finding if there's a resonance. So if the person who is creating the piece of art or going through an art process, when there's a witness to that, is there some sort of resonance happening, saying, oh yeah, I recognize what's being described or what's being portrayed. And also collaboration. In art-based research, it's really good to go back to the individuals and say, well, is this what you meant when you were doing this, creating this piece? And keep that communication flow open and collaborate with your participants, maybe even more than you would in other types of research. And in Hervey, on page 44, remember we're starting with chapters 3 and 4 here, she says that art-based research recognizes process, not just the product. So it's the art-making process as well. And there's an aspect of witnessing and interpretation that goes along with this process, and witnessing of the process, witnessing of the final product even. And in that respect, particularly interpretation, it's very hermeneutical in nature. On page 47, she goes through 5 steps that a person might use when creating some piece, even if it's for research. And that might start with an initial awareness. It might be an idea or an image that comes to mind. And then there's a recreation of that, usually projecting that internal image or sensation or thought or feeling out into a medium. And then there's refinement of the piece to make sure that it is having that resonance effect and communicating what you're trying to communicate with that piece. One of the things to note that within art-based research traditions, there are Universalist traditions that come from, for example, a more Jungian perspective. McNiff, I would put him within this category usually, not always, but usually when he's talking about art-based research, it feels more Jungian. Moon is a Jungian analyst. And there are others as well that and these folks would really be looking at, within the art process, archetypes or what are felt to be universal energies or processes that are happening within individuals. But there's also another movement, and I would put Leavy in this other movement, which is more constructivist, postmodern, feminist, those types of traditions that look at the sense of identity and self as constructed within a particular environment, or because of language or settings that you're in, that helps construct all different aspects of the self and the psyche, and that by engaging the art-making process, you're reflecting those constructed aspects of the self. You're giving voice to groups that maybe don't necessarily have voice, and that might be internally as well. That part of yourself that doesn't usually have a voice might be expressed through the expressive art process. Mind you, art-based research can also be tied very closely back to art therapy and expressive arts. and the use of that within psychology as a way of working with clinician, or a clinician working with patients or clients. So there is that tie there as well. So on one hand, art-based research can be very controversial, can be very political. Political might be a good thing, depending on where you're coming from. It can also be dismissed by more conservative researchers who are embedded in a positivist empirical framework. Art-based research can also be very liberating, providing a voice for those without a voice, those disenfranchised. It can allow diverse ways of approaching a topic or even describing an experience. So the article, as I was mentioning, that I want you to analyze is an article that I wrote from my own dissertation, where I engaged people who had near-death experiences in 5 weeks, 4 sessions of 2.5-hour sessions. And during that 2.5 hour, the first hour was spiritual direction, and the second hour and a half was a process using expressive arts. Similar to expressive arts therapy, but it wasn't. It was within a spiritual guidance framework. And we discussed their experiences, and I actually had a pre-test and a post-test. I did interviews, and then I looked at their expressive arts. I had resonance panels, 3 different types of resonance panels, to look at their expressive arts to see what they had gone through. And that is the article that I'm going to have you look at. Note where and how expressive arts was integrated into the research process, and also make sure to use the analysis worksheet when you write up your analysis of my article, and I look forward to your reflections. Do not be afraid to give a strong critique. There are problems with the study, just like there are with any study, and there are definite ways to critique it. So just because it's my article, don't be afraid to put it out there. I think it's great to be able to get that type of feedback, and but this is also just time-wise. The study was completed in 2004, so it was between 2001 and 2004 that the study was done. So it's been a while. There's been a lot of distance on my part from this article, but it was fun to do. It definitely was very engaging and a great learning process. All right, look forward to seeing you all online, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Oh, one more slide here. For the discussion, please online for our online discussion address these different topics. What generally are art-based research practices and methods? Why might someone wish to utilize such practices? What types of research questions might be addressed using art-based research? And finally, what questions come up for you with regard to these readings? All right, now I'll bid you adieu and see you online.